What do y'all want to talk about? Week 2.
Do you have the numbers for those bills by chance?
Yeah, so the education bill from Dossett is 1317. The housing bills, 1332 and 1393. And then Senator Brooks's state employee NDA bill is 1415.
Thank you.
Yep.
We talked about this last week, but since then there's been additional walkouts, students even coming up here to protest ICE yesterday. We saw a group of some Freedom Caucus members sending a letter to the state superintendent.
Yeah.
One of the things they're concerned about is teachers possibly, helping facilitate that. What do you make of the letter? What do you make of, these lawmakers getting involved?
Yeah, I'm really disappointed in that letter to the superintendent. Senator Brooks and I did put out a statement about it because we should not assume that educators are involved. Students have free will. They have critical thinking skills. And what I have seen from educators, which actually one of the schools yesterday came from my own kid's school, is that they tell the students and they tell the parents, this is not an authorized activity. If you do this, there may be consequences. They told them not to leave campus or there would be further consequences. So I think implying that educators are helping is really disappointing to me because what I've seen is only them trying to keep them safe. And we've seen youth through the centuries be leaders in movements. And I think instead of shutting it down, when you see kids in El Reno, kids in Mustang, kids in Oklahoma City, kids in Tulsa, kids in rural areas speaking about the same thing, we should be listening. Like, what are they trying to tell us? And to me, they're very concerned about excessive force and ICE and actions and what that's happening around detentions. That's a lot of diversity in kids to be concerned about the same thing. So to me, we should be focused on listening to them. Absolutely, they're going to face consequences. They will, because they've left class. But that's part of protest that they've chosen to do, is take that risk to speak for something they think is really important. So that's why I finally had to speak out, because that undermining student voice is really disappointing to me.
And I think you said in your statement something to the effect that the specific issue that is being protested this week maybe had something to do with why lawmakers are choosing now to oppose that practice?
Yeah, so my statement was really that this outrage about kids missing class is disappointing because they're focused around ICE. Now, meanwhile, when it comes to mental health conditions, we're specifically calling out the lack of mental health treatment, and we're calling out challenges around domestic violence. Of course, I've focused on eviction and that challenge for students. When it comes to those issues, where they're silent. But then suddenly, because it's about an issue that has a national political bent to it, we're going to call it out. I would like to see that same outrage about kids who aren't able to get transportation to school, who don't have adequate heat. There's a lot of things that they should be outraged at if we're going to be worried about students.
As far as the Board of Equalization meeting tomorrow, Munson said that she's expecting it to be less than what they estimated, and then Hilbert and Paxton said they're expecting more. What do you say?
Well, inflation is leading to some bumps in our revenue, so I'm not really sure. But I know we're going to see cut. Of course, our tax cuts will be hitting. Hopefully they will be including, I asked for a breakdown of the changes in federal tax law and how that's going to impact the state. And I was given a total from the Tax Commission of 9 to 13 million reduction in revenue from those changes to federal taxes. So I think we're going to see the kind of cuts from the federal government that should give us pause and make us very cautious, because the cuts to Medicaid are going to be pretty catastrophic.
So how do you fix that? What do you do?
Well, we got to stop cutting taxes, for one. We still have in place a trigger that could cut taxes for more as soon as next year. That's concerning, especially if we see big bumps in revenue. I think we've got to prioritize the things that matter. So to me, health, childcare should be top of that list. We don't have any contingency planning right now for what we're going to do as these federal cuts come into place.
On early education outcomes, Senator Lonnie Paxton is really pushing kids spend even more days in school. I know that was something that was spoken about last year, and there was a bill that passed that increased it by a day, I think. And he's really adamant about that as part of the solution for the reading rates and just education in general. Just your thoughts on the pros and cons of kids being in school. Do they need it? Can we pay for it? Resource concerns.
Yeah, I mean, our number one concern should be having smaller class sizes with qualified educators in front of them. And I think if that's part of the way that we can convince our colleagues to invest in smaller class sizes, I support it. I'm concerned that it's going to run off more people who are being underpaid already by asking them to stay longer in under-resourced schools. I, this week, saw a thread of teachers they ask teachers in early childhood to tell the class numbers, class sizes. These teachers have 26, 27, 28, 29 students in pre-K kindergarten classes without assistants, or they're sharing an assistant with another classroom. That is a much bigger concern than having a couple more days of school. So I wish we would focus on that first. I feel like adding days is just a distraction.
The Board of Equalization meeting tomorrow. Republicans say they're having good conversations. They're kind of on the same page in the House and Senate with some of the budget talks, even talk about getting a budget done early. How do you feel like you're seeing the budget, your caucus is seeing the budget? Do you see us getting done mid-May?
Well, I'll just say the last few years we've been very committed to budget transparency, and so if they're farther along in their talks, that actually concerns me, and I need to go talk to the budget chairman, because in past we've had hearings where our subcommittees were talking through the priorities of those subcommittee areas, and we have not done that. So if they're that far along, I would say we're not in that conversation, and so I have pretty big concerns. I think the things we've seen so far, certainly the governor's proposal is not realistic, and so I hope that we're talking in real numbers, and we're not going to cut $250 million out of a Medicaid program overnight. That's not going to happen. So I think I hope we're starting from real numbers there. I have seen very solid spreadsheets from Senator Hall. I know that he's very assiduous, very careful with those numbers, but I don't yet know what the priorities are that they're suggesting.
The governor and President Donald Trump disagreeing about, the NGA and everything going on there. The president calling Governor Stitt a rhino, Republican in name only. Your thoughts? Are we concerned that the federal government could cut funds to the state of Oklahoma because of this disagreement between the governor and the president? And your reaction to it all, what have you seen from the governor that you like or dislike?
I think this issue between Governor Stitt and the president shows how hard it is to consistently find common ground. The people want us to find common ground. They want us to work together. And this shows how these things can blow up and blow out of proportion constantly. Trying to be bipartisan is hard, and it takes discipline, takes grown-ups making those moves. So I'm really concerned if the president is vindictive and petty in response to something as clear as, hey, we need to work together across 50 states. That's deeply troubling. I think I'm really glad for the leadership position that Stitt has taken. The governor has taken a hard stand a couple of times this year in the interest of making sure we're finding common ground. I'm grateful for that. We cannot have a country and a state that are functioning unless we work to find common ground.
In terms of finding common ground, what do you think about that as it relates to the tribes?
Well, I've consistently criticized the governor's approach to the tribes. I don't think that I've heard for years that there's not been good faith negotiations, and certainly the comments made during the State of the State were deeply disappointing and not educated in reality. So yeah, there's not been common ground there. I think I've seen our tribal leaders reaching out constantly to try to create those opportunities.
Go ahead.
Forgive me if this is a little out of left field. I wanted to ask you about on Monday, the statewide charter school board rejected the proposal for a new religious charter school. I'm curious if you had any kind of reaction to seeing the board's decision on that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that they took that stand, and I know that they're supporting the judicial ruling, and I think that makes sense. I think we should stick with the law, which is to not send our public money to religious institutions. And so I'm glad that they took that stand. It's sad to hear them say immediately they expect to be sued. That's disappointing that this is it almost feels like a trick on our elected officials and on the people trying to govern. But I'm glad they made the decision they did.
Speaking of the governor, between his state of the state, where he called for a number of changes in state policy, including the elimination of medical marijuana, to his speak with the regents where he wanted to get rid of tenure, what do you expect to happen to those two issues? Are we going to eliminate medical marijuana in Oklahoma and tell university professors you don't get tenure anymore?
We're seeing a lot of the governor trying to take authority he doesn't actually have. And so I think that those are not going to move through in that way. I'm worried about the attacks on higher ed. I do think that that's going to undermine trust. I think we've seen what's happened in Common Ed as they've undermined trust in educators. If they do that at the higher ed level, I think we're going to see the same kind of exodus of our higher ed, our professors. So I'm worried about that. But I think this is a lot of overreach on his part without the diplomacy to back it up.
What about medical marijuana? Do you see it going away?
You know, I don't see us sending another state question to the ballot. I mean, they can if they want, because I'll tell you what, people will turn out in great numbers. I think there's a lot of folks that want that program. They just want it run well. And so there needs to be improvements to the administration of the program.